The year was 1939. Europe was ablaze, the world bracing for a war of unprecedented scale. Nations were arming, mobilizing, and pushing their industrial might to the limits. In the United States, behind the steel walls of Lockheed's sprawling factories, a different kind of war was taking place. A war of ideas, blueprints, and calculations. Engineers hunched over drafting tables, debating the feasibility of a new fighter aircraft, one that defied the conventions of the day. Its name, the P-38 Lightning. Its design, unconventional. Its potential, uncertain. Some called it a marvel. Twin engines mounted on sleek twin fuselages, a central nacelle housing the cockpit and heavy nose-mounted armament. Others called it a gamble. Too heavy, some said. Too complex. Its twin engines are liabilities, not assets. The whispers echoed through the corridors. Could this aircraft survive the chaos of real combat against experienced Luftwaffe pilots flying razor-sharp Bf-109s or the deadly FW-190? Would the supercharged Allison engines hold up at high altitude? Could the airframe endure the stress of long-range missions over hostile territory? The engineers' doubts were not born of fear or stubbornness, but of experience. In war, machines fail, and failure means death. As the first prototypes rolled off the assembly line, the tension was palpable. Test pilots climbed into the cockpit and fired up the engines, the twin roars shaking the hangars. On the ground, mechanics checked every bolt, every control cable, every weapon mount. The P-38 was unlike any fighter the world had seen. Its long, angular frame and dual booms made it appear almost alien. On the runway, it accelerated, lifted, and sliced through the sky with a speed that defied its critics. Yet the skeptics were not silenced. Engineers muttered about handling quirks, unpredictable torque from the engines, and the challenges of field maintenance in the brutal theaters of war, the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, the freezing heights of Europe.
And yet, amid the doubts, there were believers. A handful of engineers recognized the P-38's raw potential, unparalleled range, concentrated nose-mounted firepower, a climb rate that could rival any fighter, and twin engines that offered redundancy in life-or-death situations. In the crucible of war, this fighter was not merely a machine. It was a weapon capable of changing the rules of air combat. But potential alone would not win battles. Only skilled pilots, courage under fire, and the unforgiving reality of combat could reveal its true power. By 1941, as America edged closer to war, the P-38 was assigned to operational units. Still, skepticism lingered. In briefing rooms and hangars, engineers debated, pilots hesitated, and commanders wondered whether the aircraft could survive the first encounter with a seasoned enemy. The stage was set for a trial by fire, not in laboratories or simulations, but high above the war-torn islands of the Pacific and over the burning skies of Europe. In the hands of the right pilot, a man who could exploit the strengths and endure the quirks, this outdated fighter might yet prove the skeptics wrong. In the cockpit, the P-38's roar was not just a sound of engines. It was a call to arms, a promise of speed, firepower, and endurance. And in the shadow of doubt, the pilots who climbed into this machine knew that every mission would test not only their skill, but the very limits of the aircraft. What engineers had labeled risky, experimental, or outdated was about to face the unforgiving truth of aerial warfare. And in that moment, the line between failure and legend would be drawn in the skies, in the heart of battle, where the P-38 Lightning would either rise to become a symbol of American air power or fall as another ambitious experiment swallowed by war. The world was at war. The sky was the battlefield. And in that vast, open arena, the P-38 Lightning waited, a strange, almost defiant machine, ready to challenge both men and enemy fighters alike.
The P-38 Lightning was born in the crucible of necessity and innovation. In the late 1930s, as global tensions escalated and the clouds of war gathered over Europe and Asia, the United States Army Air Corps recognized the urgent need for a fighter that could dominate the skies. Conventional single-engine designs were fast and agile, but they lacked the endurance, firepower, and versatility needed for the modern battlefield. The engineers at Lockheed, led by the brilliant Clarence Kelly Johnson, took on the challenge with boldness bordering on audacity. They envisioned a fighter that was unlike any other, one that could strike with speed, climb higher than its adversaries, and carry enough armament to obliterate enemy formations before they even realized the danger. From the first sketches, the P-38 was unconventional. Its twin engines, mounted on separate fuselage booms, flanked a central nacelle that housed the pilot and the aircraft's devastating nose-mounted armament. 4 .50 caliber Browning machine guns and a 20mm cannon were packed tightly into that nose. Concentrated firepower capable of tearing through bombers and fighters alike. Unlike other planes that relied on wing-mounted guns, the P-38's design ensured perfect convergence of fire, eliminating the need for the pilot to adjust aim in the chaos of a dogfight. This alone was a revolution in aerial combat design. But the design brought immense challenges. The twin-engine layout required precise synchronization. Any imbalance could send the aircraft into a dangerous torque-induced spin. The Allison engines were advanced for their time, featuring turbo superchargers that allowed the P-38 to climb to high altitudes faster than almost any fighter in the world. Yet these systems were delicate and complex. Mechanics crews would later refer to the Lightning as a mechanic's nightmare, and pilots knew that pushing the engines too hard could be catastrophic. Every flight demanded respect, precision, and a keen understanding of the aircraft's strengths and limitations.
The P-38's landing gear, retractable and heavy-duty, allowed it to operate from rough airstrips in remote theaters of war, while its long-range capabilities made it invaluable for escort missions, reconnaissance, and surprise strikes deep behind enemy lines. It was not built merely for speed or agility. It was built for survival, endurance, and dominance. Some engineers, still skeptical, warned that such a radical design would never survive prolonged combat. Yet others, quietly confident, saw in the Lightning a fighter that could redefine air warfare. The first prototypes took to the skies in 1939, testing the limits of aerodynamics, engine power, and pilot skill. Early flights were daring exercises in innovation, with test pilots pushing the Lightning to its limits, climbing higher, diving faster, and executing maneuvers that would later become standard dogfight tactics. Every successful flight, every mastered turn, every engine synchronization that held under stress proved that the design was not a gamble, but a calculated advance in aviation engineering. As the P-38 moved from prototype to production, the urgency of war shaped its evolution. Modifications were made to improve armament accuracy, engine reliability, and structural integrity. Combat-ready variants were equipped for multiple roles: long-range escort missions for bombers over Europe, low-altitude ground attack over the Pacific Islands, and daring reconnaissance flights deep into enemy territory. The P-38's versatility became one of its defining features, a quality that would soon save lives and tip the scales in battle. But even as the aircraft emerged from the factory and into operational units, the whispers of doubt persisted. Engineers who had once questioned the feasibility of the twin-engine fighter continued to monitor each mission closely. Could the Lightning survive against swarms of enemy fighters? Could it withstand flak over heavily defended targets? Its reputation would not be earned in testing halls or assembly lines. It would be forged in the skies, in the chaos of combat, and in the hands of pilots daring enough to exploit its full potential. The P-38 Lightning was no ordinary fighter. It was a machine born of necessity, tempered by engineering brilliance, and destined to become a weapon of legend. Its birth was more than the creation of a plane. It was the creation of a battlefield force, a flying embodiment of American ingenuity and determination. And as it rolled onto the runways of forward airfields, engines roaring, the stage was set for the pilots who would push it to its limits, pilots who would face overwhelming odds and emerge as heroes, rewriting the rules of aerial combat. In the coming battles over the Pacific jungles, the frozen skies of Europe, and the fire-swept deserts of North Africa, the P-38 would prove that sometimes the boldest ideas are the most deadly. From the drawing board to the battlefield, the Lightning was ready to show the world what it could do. And for one pilot about to step into history, it would become the ultimate weapon, a machine that would allow him to face an entire enemy wing and defy the engineers who once doubted him.
By the early 1940s, the P-38 Lightning was finally ready for combat. Its sleek twin booms and powerful engines rolled off the production lines, bound for the front lines of a world at war. Europe, the Pacific, North Africa, each theater posed its own deadly challenges. And the Lightning, still doubted by some engineers, would soon face its first true tests. In the Pacific, the sprawling islands of the Philippines, New Guinea, and the Solomon Chain became proving grounds. Japanese fighters prowled the skies, their Mitsubishi A6M-0s fast and maneuverable, striking with precision and ferocity. The P-38 pilots quickly learned that speed alone would not win a fight. Coordination, altitude advantage, and split-second decision-making determined life or death. Yet the Lightning's twin engines allowed it to climb faster than almost any adversary, while its concentrated nose armament could tear apart enemy planes in a single pass. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it was a deadly weapon. Over Europe, the challenges were different. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and FW-190s patrolled the skies with deadly efficiency. Long-range escort missions for bombers exposed P-38s to flak, enemy fighters, and the brutal stress of extended operations. Pilots learned to exploit the Lightning's strengths: dive speed, stability in high-altitude maneuvers, and the ability to maintain control even if one engine was damaged. These early missions tested both machine and man. Some aircraft returned scarred, riddled with bullet holes. Some pilots were never seen again.
Yet, even in these early deployments, the P-38 began to earn its reputation. Pilots reported victories against swarming enemy fighters, daring strikes deep behind enemy lines, and resilience that belied the doubts of engineers. The Lightning proved it was not merely a concept on paper, but a combat-ready weapon, capable of holding its own in the most extreme circumstances.
It was here, in the chaos of real warfare, that the stage was set for the legends to emerge. Among the pilots flying these machines was one whose daring, skill, and determination would turn skepticism into astonishment. A man who would take the outdated P-38 into impossible situations, outmaneuver entire enemy wings, and etch his name and the aircraft into the annals of air combat history. The P-38 was no longer just a fighter. It was a statement, a declaration that American ingenuity could survive, thrive, and dominate even when the odds were stacked against it. Amid the roar of P-38 engines and the chaos of war, some pilots stood out, not because they had the most aircraft under their wings, but because they had the skill, courage, and instinct to survive and dominate in impossible situations. One such pilot was Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer, a name that would become synonymous with daring aerial combat and the lethal potential of the P-38 Lightning. Blumer was not a man molded by arrogance. He was meticulous, disciplined, and fearless, qualities forged through hours of flight training and early skirmishes over the Pacific and European theaters. He had an uncanny ability to read the sky, anticipate enemy moves, and make split-second decisions under fire. To his squadron, he was a steady hand in the storm, a pilot who could be counted on to complete missions others would hesitate to attempt. His nickname, Scrappy, reflected his determination to fight against the odds, a fitting moniker for a man who would face dozens of enemy fighters and emerge victorious. Assigned to one of the P-38's first operational squadrons, Blumer immediately understood the strengths and weaknesses of his aircraft. He respected its twin engines, its concentrated nose firepower, and its long-range capabilities. But he also knew the risks. The engines could fail, the plane could be damaged, and, in a dogfight, even a Lightning could be overwhelmed. He spent hours in training, pushing the aircraft to its limits, performing aggressive climbs, tight rolls, and dive attacks that tested both his skill and the plane's engineering.
Blumer's early missions were a crucible of fire and smoke. Escorting bombers over enemy-held islands, he faced Japanese Zeros in tightly coordinated attacks. Over Europe, he tangled with BF-109s and FW-190s, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, where every decision could mean life or death. Each sortie honed his instincts. Each engagement taught him the deadly calculus of aerial warfare. Speed versus maneuverability, altitude versus position, aggression versus caution. But what set Blumer apart was not only his mastery of tactics, it was his willingness to push the P-38 beyond what others believed possible. While some engineers doubted the aircraft's capabilities and some fellow pilots preferred conventional strategies, Blumer saw opportunity in the Lightning's strengths. Its climb rate, its long-range firepower, and its twin-engine reliability gave him options that few other pilots could exploit. He flew with a blend of calculated precision and raw courage, the perfect combination to turn an outdated fighter into a machine of legend. By the time he was about to face his most famous mission, a confrontation that would pit him against an overwhelming enemy force, Blumer had already proven himself as a pilot capable of bending the rules of aerial combat. He was about to take the P-38 into history, showing the skeptics, the doubters, and the engineers who questioned its worth that one man in the right machine could defy impossible odds. The stage was set.
The skies would become a battlefield where skill, machine, and daring would collide. And Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer would be at the center of it all, ready to turn the P-38 Lightning into a weapon that no enemy could ignore.
It was a mission that most pilots would have refused. Intelligence reports had indicated a massive enemy formation, more fighters than a single squadron could hope to confront, and more than any pilot alone could survive. Yet, on that fateful day, Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer climbed into his P-38 Lightning with a steely calm. The engines roared, twin Allison power plants vibrating through the fuselage, ready to propel him into the heart of combat. What awaited him was not just a fight, it was an audacious test of skill, courage, and the limits of his aircraft. The briefing had been grim. Over the Pacific, a reconnaissance flight had spotted a Japanese strike force assembling near a vital airfield. Dozens of enemy fighters were armed and ready, with bombers behind them, forming a coordinated wing that could overwhelm conventional forces. Commanders debated sending a full squadron, but a sudden change in orders meant Blumer would intercept first, alone. The odds were staggering. Engineers back at Lockheed who had once questioned the P-38's viability would have looked at the plan and shaken their heads. One pilot against a massive enemy wing. It seemed impossible. Yet, for Blumer, this was the kind of challenge that defined heroes. As he approached the area, the horizon darkened with enemy aircraft, 40, 50, perhaps 60 planes, each one a potential death sentence, swarmed across the sky. Blumer assessed the situation instantly. Altitude advantage, sun position, and approach vector, every element mattered. The P-38's twin engines gave him acceleration that could surprise attackers. Its nose-mounted guns promised devastating firepower, and its long wingspan provided stability in high-speed dives. He had to use every advantage the Lightning offered, or he would not return.
The engagement began with a burst of chaos. Enemy fighters dove in coordinated attacks, trying to force him into a defensive posture. Yet Blumer did not retreat. He executed precise climbs and dives, weaving through the formation, firing concentrated bursts from his nose guns. One by one, enemy planes were shredded or forced into evasive maneuvers. His situational awareness, instinct, and unyielding aggression allowed him to turn the P-38 into more than a fighter. It became a weapon that multiplied his presence in the sky. Minutes stretched into eternity as he danced through the enemy wing, each maneuver calculated and daring. Bullets whizzed past, tracer fire painting the sky in deadly arcs. The P-38 endured, engines screaming, structure holding, while Blumer's marksmanship tore through the enemy ranks. It was not brute force alone that carried him. It was skill, daring, and an unshakable understanding of the Lightning's capabilities. By the end of the engagement, the impossible had been achieved. The enemy formation was scattered, several planes downed, and the reputation of the P-38 elevated in a single breathtaking display. The engineers who had doubted its potential would later learn the truth. In the hands of a master pilot, the Lightning was more than a machine. It was a force capable of turning the tide of battle one daring maneuver at a time. The sky erupted into chaos. Enemy fighters swarmed like angry hornets, their engines screaming, bullets tearing through the thin air. Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer was alone in his P-38 Lightning, yet he faced a formation that could have overwhelmed an entire squadron. Every second counted. Hesitation meant death.
Every maneuver, every burst of fire was a matter of life and death. Blumer dove into the fray, exploiting the P-38's advantages with surgical precision. Its twin engines roared, propelling him faster than any single-engine adversary could follow in a straight line. He used altitude to his advantage, climbing sharply to gain energy, then diving at an angle that sent tracers streaking across enemy wings. The concentrated nose-mounted armament of the Lightning became an extension of his will, a deadly instrument that struck with terrifying accuracy. 1, 2, 3 enemy fighters spiraled out of control under his fire. The enemy pressed harder, splitting into groups to flank him from multiple directions. A Japanese Zero darted in from the sun, hoping to catch him unawares. Blumer twisted the controls, performing a high-speed roll, letting the enemy overshoot. In a heartbeat, he fired a lethal burst, the plane tearing apart under his concentrated fire. Another formation dove from above, their intent clear: force the P-38 into defensive maneuvers and finish him off. Yet Blumer turned defense into offense. Sharp climbs, sudden dives, and precise banking rolls allowed him to stay inside the enemy formation, attacking and evading simultaneously.
The chaos intensified as he threaded through tracer fire and the smoke of damaged aircraft. Every engagement tested his limits. Engine temperatures climbing, airframe vibrating from the strain, but the P-38 held. It was a machine built for extremes, and in Blumer's hands, it became unstoppable. He picked targets, timed his bursts, and used the sheer size and power of the Lightning to intimidate opponents. Enemy fighters found themselves trapped in a deadly dance, where any miscalculation could cost them their lives. Minutes felt like hours. Yet Blumer's resolve did not falter. He exploited every advantage, diving to gain speed, banking sharply to evade, and using the P-38's long wingspan to stabilize during aggressive turns. Each shock was calculated, each maneuver deliberate. Enemy planes fell one by one, their formations breaking apart under the relentless assault. By the end of the engagement, the impossible had become reality. Blumer had survived, his P-38 scarred but intact. Enemy numbers were decimated, morale shattered, and the battlefield witnessed the deadly efficiency of one pilot mastering the full potential of his aircraft. In the sky, the legend of the P-38 Lightning and its fearless pilot had begun to crystallize. The engineers who once doubted the plane's capabilities, the skeptics who whispered about its limitations, would soon learn a harsh truth. The P-38, in the hands of the right pilot, was more than a machine. It was a force multiplier. A weapon capable of turning the tide of aerial combat. And Lawrence or Scrappy Blumer was the living proof.
The battle raged on, but something had shifted. Lawrence Scrappy Blumer, alone in his P-38 Lightning, was no longer merely surviving. He was taking control. The enemy had come expecting an easy victory, a lone fighter to cut down. Instead, they faced a pilot who turned chaos into calculated aggression, exploiting every weakness in their formations. The tide of the dogfight was beginning to turn. Blumer's eyes scanned the sky, calculating angles, altitudes, and the relative positions of dozens of enemy fighters. Every movement mattered. He recognized patterns in the enemy's attack, anticipating their dives, flanking maneuvers, and attempts to entrap him. With each burst of fire, a plane spiraled downward, smoke trailing across the horizon.
The P-38, once doubted by engineers for its unconventional design, became the instrument of Blumer's audacious mastery. He dove with precision, gaining speed and energy, then leveled out to unleash a concentrated salvo from the nose-mounted guns. The firepower was devastating. No convergence issues, no wasted bullets, just deadly accuracy. Enemy aircraft were torn apart before they could react, scattering the formation and leaving openings for further attacks. Blumer pressed the advantage relentlessly, striking with a mix of aggression and strategic foresight that few pilots could match. The sky, once dominated by enemy fighters, now belonged to the Lightning. Blumer used his aircraft's twin engines to outclimb opponents, then performed tight rolls and sharp turns to evade counterattacks. Enemy pilots were forced to split and reposition constantly, their cohesion destroyed. One by one, their formations crumbled under the combined force of Blumer's skill and the P-38's raw capabilities. Even as he engaged, Blumer remained calm, his instincts honed by countless missions and a deep understanding of the P-38. He knew when to attack, when to evade, and when to exploit the enemy's mistakes. The Lightning's stability allowed him to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible in other fighters: sudden dives, high-speed banking rolls, and climbing turns that left pursuing aircraft struggling to keep up. In that moment, pilot and machine were inseparable, a single deadly force operating with precision and purpose. By the end of this engagement, the enemy wing was fractured and demoralized. Several planes had been destroyed, others forced to retreat, and the sky itself seemed to belong to Blumer. His P-38 bore the scars of battle, flak damage across the fuselage, bullet holes through the wings, but it had endured, performing flawlessly under conditions that would have grounded lesser aircraft. In the span of minutes, Blumer had shifted from a desperate underdog to a dominant force in the skies. The impossible odds were no longer insurmountable. The very machine engineers had questioned, the fighter once labeled outdated, had proven itself in the most brutal test of all: real combat. And Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer had become the embodiment of its lethal potential. The lesson was clear. In the hands of a skilled pilot, a daring mind, and an aircraft designed to exploit every advantage, even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome. The P-38 Lightning was no longer just a fighter. It was a weapon capable of rewriting the rules of aerial warfare, and Blumer was its undisputed master.
The sky had cleared, the echoes of gunfire fading into the distance, and Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer returned to base in his battle-scarred P-38 Lightning. The engines hummed steadily, a testament to both the aircraft's engineering and the pilot's mastery. He had faced a massive enemy wing alone, dozens of fighters coordinated and aggressive, and survived. Not only that, he had turned the battle to his advantage, destroying enemy aircraft and scattering formations that had seemed invincible only minutes before. Ground crews rushed to meet him, their eyes wide at the sight of the Lightning. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage, flak had torn through the wings, and scorch marks lined the nose. Yet the aircraft had endured. Mechanics and engineers who had once questioned the design's durability now walked around in silent astonishment. The twin engines, once doubted for their complexity and vulnerability, had performed flawlessly under extreme strain. Every control surface had responded, every system had held, and every weapon had delivered its deadly promise. Blumer himself climbed out of the cockpit unshaken, already mentally replaying the engagement. His squadron gathered around, a mixture of awe and disbelief on their faces. Few could comprehend what had occurred in the sky. One pilot, alone, had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious.
Engineers and commanders would later review the mission in meticulous detail, analyzing maneuvers, flight data, and enemy losses. Reports confirmed what had been witnessed firsthand. The P-38, when flown with skill and daring, was capable of feats once thought impossible.
The recognition came swiftly. Blumer's actions were cited in squadron reports, praised in dispatches, and shared among other units as a demonstration of both courage and the Lightning's capabilities. His name became synonymous with audacity, skill, and the deadly potential of the P-38. For the engineers who had once doubted the aircraft, the lesson was undeniable. Theoretical limits were no match for real-world skill, and the Lightning had proven itself not only operational but extraordinary. This mission also left a lasting imprint on morale. Pilots across the theater took heart, seeing in Blumer's victory the proof that daring, precision, and mastery of one's machine could overcome even the most intimidating enemy. The P-38 was no longer just a new fighter with a strange twin-boom design. It was a symbol of innovation, resilience, and American air power. In the aftermath, as reports circulated and accolades were noted, the broader war effort benefited from a simple truth. Sometimes it takes one pilot, one aircraft, and the courage to defy expectation to show the world what is truly possible. Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer and his P-38 Lightning had not only survived the impossible, they had rewritten it.
The P-38 Lightning had proven itself in a way few could have imagined. Once doubted by engineers and critics alike, the aircraft had transformed from a risky, unconventional design into a symbol of American aerial innovation and power. Its performance in the hands of skilled pilots like Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer cemented its reputation as one of the most versatile and deadly fighters of the war. Across the Pacific and European theaters, the P-38 demonstrated its unique capabilities. Long-range escort missions allowed bombers to reach deep into enemy territory, while reconnaissance flights captured critical intelligence behind enemy lines. In ground attack roles, the Lightning struck with precision, leveraging its speed and heavy armament to disrupt enemy positions and supply lines. Its twin engines provided reliability that often saved pilots in the heat of battle, allowing them to return to base even after sustaining serious damage. The accomplishments of individual pilots added to the aircraft's legendary status. Blumer's daring engagement against an overwhelming enemy wing became the blueprint for how one skilled pilot could leverage the P-38's strengths to dominate the skies. Other aces, including John S. Loisel and Charles H. McDonald, followed in similar fashion, executing missions that combined tactical brilliance, courage, and the raw firepower of the Lightning. Each victory reinforced the belief that innovation, when matched with skill, could overcome even the most daunting odds.
Beyond combat, the P-38 influenced military strategy and aircraft design. Its long-range capabilities allowed commanders to rethink mission planning, extending the reach of fighter operations and changing the calculus of air warfare. Its concentrated nose-mounted armament demonstrated the effectiveness of precision firepower, influencing later fighter designs. Engineers who had once doubted the Lightning were forced to reassess their assumptions, acknowledging that innovation often demands risk and that conventional wisdom could not always predict battlefield effectiveness. The story of Blumer and his P-38 also had a profound effect on morale. Pilots who witnessed or heard of his exploits drew inspiration, knowing that skill, daring, and the right machine could turn even the most desperate situations into triumphs. The P-38 became a symbol not only of technological achievement, but of the human spirit at its finest, courageous, inventive, and relentless in the face of danger. As the war progressed, The P-38 continued to prove its worth, achieving hundreds of aerial victories, completing countless missions, and saving lives through its resilience and versatility. Its legacy endured long after the smoke of battle cleared. And at the center of that legacy stood the daring exploits of pilots like Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer, whose mastery of the Lightning transformed doubt into legend, and a once-questioned fighter into an icon of American air power. The war eventually moved on. Battles were fought, victories and losses tallied, and the world began to take stock of the machines and men who had defined the skies. Among them, the P-38 Lightning stood as a testament to ingenuity, courage, and the extraordinary potential of daring design. Once questioned, doubted, and even dismissed by engineers and military planners as too complex or outdated, it had proven itself under fire, in the most extreme circumstances, and in the hands of pilots bold enough to push it to its limits. Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer's legendary mission, facing an overwhelming enemy wing alone and emerging victorious, had become more than a story of personal heroism. It was the embodiment of a truth every engineer and strategist eventually had to acknowledge. Innovation often defies expectation, and the battlefield is the ultimate arbiter of a machine's worth. What had been theoretical speculation in laboratories and hangars had been tested in the crucible of combat. The P-38 had survived, adapted, and excelled. The engineers who once questioned the Lightning's twin engines, its unconventional twin-boom design, and its concentrated armament were forced to reconsider. Their doubts, grounded in technical caution, had been valid in theory, but incomplete in practice. The aircraft, combined with a pilot of exceptional skill, had demonstrated capabilities that far exceeded initial expectations. In that moment, skepticism transformed into respect, and what had once been outdated became iconic.
But the story of the P-38 and its pilots was not merely about machines. It was about the synergy between human skill and engineering brilliance. The airplane could not fight itself, and even the most advanced design required a pilot capable of mastering its strengths and compensating for its weaknesses. Blumer's daring, precision, and quick thinking had unlocked the Lightning's full potential, turning a solitary fighter into a force capable of overwhelming an entire enemy formation. The legacy of that mission, and of the P-38 as a whole, endured long after the war ended. It reshaped the perception of aerial combat, influenced subsequent fighter designs, and inspired generations of pilots. The tale of engineers proven wrong serves as a reminder that bold ideas, once tested and mastered, can defy even the harshest skepticism. Innovation, courage, and mastery of one's tools, in combination, have the power to change history. In the end, the P-38 Lightning did more than survive the war. It soared into legend, not because it was flawless, but because it was powerful in the hands of those willing to test its limits. And Lawrence "Scrappy" Blumer, facing impossible odds and emerging triumphant, ensured that the world would never again underestimate the deadly promise of a well-designed war machine and the man who dares to master it.